Late-night broadcasts once carried their names, newspapers printed their faces, investigators searched, reporters asked questions, and communities waited for answers. These cases weren't ignored. They were reported, investigated, and discussed until the attention slowly disappeared. As time moved forward, the stories grew quieter, leaving mysteries suspended between memory and silence. Let's uncover 5 disturbing missing person cases that faded from the headlines. Story 1. On the evening of July 11th, 1990, winter settled over Melbourne's southeastern suburbs as commuters stepped off late trains along the Frankston railway line. At approximately 10:20 p.m., a young woman walked alone through Kananook railway station toward a dimly lit car park where her car waited. Within minutes, the platform grew quiet again, leaving only the hum of passing trains and an uneasy stillness. Sarah MacDiarmid was born on November 15, 1966, in Scotland and moved with her family to Australia in 1987, settling in Melbourne. She was 23 years old at the time of her disappearance. Friends and relatives described Sarah as outgoing, kind, and independent. She enjoyed music, fashion, and shopping trips while maintaining strong connections to both her Scottish roots and her new Australian home. She worked full-time and remained closely connected to her parents, Peter and Sheila, and her brother, Alistair. Those who knew her said she valued routine and family contact. There were no signs she intended to leave her life behind or distance herself from loved ones. On Wednesday, July 11th, 1990, Sarah played tennis after work with 2 friends at Flinders Park in East Melbourne. The group later walked to Richmond Station but missed their train, rerouting through Caulfield before boarding a Frankston-bound service. Her friends exited at Bonbeach, while Sarah continued alone to Kananook Station, where her red 1978 Honda Civic was parked. At approximately 10:20 p.m., witnesses saw her leave the train and cross the footbridge toward the car park. The area was poorly lit and largely empty at that hour. When Sarah failed to return home by 11 p.m., her family became concerned. Around 1 a.m., her brother went to the station expecting she might arrive on a later train. Instead, he found her locked car still parked there. Sarah was gone. Police discovered bloodstains beside the vehicle and drag marks leading toward nearby bushes. A cigarette lighter belonging to Sarah was recovered at the scene. Witnesses later reported hearing a woman shout, "Give me back my keys," around the time Sarah would have reached her car. A 21-day search involving more than 250 officers across land, sea, and air produced no trace of her. In 2006, a coroner concluded Sarah had died as a result of foul play. Though the exact circumstances remained unknown, investigators reviewed potential links to known offenders as part of standard cold case comparisons. Convicted serial killer Paul Dannette was interviewed in 2011 and denied involvement. Another offender was later examined during routine investigative reviews. No charges were filed and no suspect has been officially identified. A reward increased to $1 million remains available for information. Despite early coverage in Australia, media attention gradually faded as years passed without arrests, suspects, or new physical evidence. With no body recovered and few investigative updates released publicly, news cycles shifted toward newer cases. Periodic anniversaries briefly renewed attention, but long stretches passed where Sarah's disappearance received little coverage. causing the case to quietly move out of public headlines while remaining open to investigators. For Sarah's parents, time has not lessened the uncertainty. They have said their greatest wish is simply to bring their daughter home, regardless of legal outcomes. Anniversary memorials have been held at Kananook Station, where a plaque now stands in her honor. The family also created the Not Alone initiative to support others experiencing unresolved loss. Podcasts and documentaries decades later helped reintroduce her story to new audiences, but much of the effort to preserve her memory has come from family persistence rather than sustained media attention. What if someone present at the station that night remembers a detail they once believed was unimportant? And what if the answer has always existed just beyond the moments people thought to report? Story 2. On a warm Sunday afternoon, March 18, 1990, twin sisters walked through their Augusta, Georgia neighborhood on a routine errand. The streets were familiar, the route ordinary, and the day unremarkable. After stopping at a convenience store near home, the girls disappeared into the evening, leaving behind a silence that would last decades. Dannette and Jeannette Millbrook were 15-year-old fraternal twins born on April 2, 1974. They grew up in a large, close-knit African-American family in Augusta, surrounded by siblings, cousins, and extended relatives. Family members described them as typical teenagers with distinct personalities. Dannette was protective and outspoken, often standing up for her quieter sister. Jeannette was gentle, shy, and deeply compassionate, known for her love of animals and calm nature. Despite occasional school challenges, both girls were considered home-oriented and strongly connected to their families. Their mother, Mary Sturgis, worked hard to support her children, and relatives say the twins followed household routines closely. They attended church regularly and were expected home before dark. According to family members, there were no signs they planned to run away or leave voluntarily. On Sunday, March 18th, the twins attended church with their family before being asked to pick up food nearby. Later that afternoon, they left home again to collect bus fare money from their godfather so they could travel to school during the week. They successfully reached his home, received $20, and visited relatives nearby. During the day, the girls mentioned being followed earlier by a man in a white van, a comment that seemed unsettling but unclear in significance at the time. As evening approached, they stopped at a pump-and-shop convenience store where a clerk who knew the family saw them buying snacks. It was the last confirmed sighting. When the twins failed to return home, their mother contacted the police, but was told she needed to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report. The report was finally taken the following evening. Neither girl was ever seen again. Early investigative decisions shaped the case's future. Authorities quickly classified the twins as runaways, despite family objections, and no evidence supporting that conclusion. Key witnesses, including relatives who had seen the girls hours earlier, were reportedly never formally interviewed. Basic case details were recorded incorrectly, including names, dates, and locations. Within roughly a year, investigators informed the family that the case had reached a dead end. By 1993, the twins' file was closed in national missing person databases under unclear circumstances, at one point even listed as located, though the family had received no such information. In 2013, newly elected Sheriff Richard Roundtree reopened the investigation, describing the earlier handling as troubling and based largely on hearsay. Podcasts and documentaries later brought renewed attention, generating new leads, though none produced confirmed answers. A prison inmate later claimed knowledge of events surrounding the twins' disappearance, but investigators determined parts of his account conflicted with verified timelines and did not pursue the lead further. The disappearance received minimal media coverage from the beginning. Because police labeled the twins as runaways, the case drew little sustained reporting. Without press conferences, suspect announcements, or investigative updates, public attention faded quickly. Over time, administrative errors, closed files, and shifting priorities allowed the case to slip from headlines almost entirely, despite the rarity of two siblings vanishing together. For decades, the twins' sister, Shanta Sturgis, has led efforts to keep their story alive. She organized flyers, advocated for media attention, and helped place billboards featuring missing persons in Augusta. Anniversaries are marked quietly, often led by family rather than institutions. Their mother searched tirelessly for answers until her passing, never believing her daughters left willingly. Even after renewed investigations, the family continues to struggle with limited communication from authorities, describing the experience as history repeating itself. Hope, followed by silence. What if the case had been treated as an abduction from the very beginning instead of a runaway report? And how many answers were lost during the years when no one was actively looking? Story 3. Some disappearances happen loudly, followed by searches, headlines, and national attention. Others fade almost unnoticed. In the late 1980s, somewhere along the highways of the American Southwest, a former musician, once connected to one of folk music's most influential bands, quietly slipped out of public view. Few realized at the time that Christina "Licorice" McKechnie would never be seen again. Christina McKechnie was born on October 2, 1945, in Edinburgh, Scotland. Creative from an early age, she read poetry at local folk clubs during her youth and became immersed in the growing British folk music scene of the 1960s. She later joined the psychedelic folk group, The Incredible String Band, initially contributing backing vocals before becoming a full member by 1968. Known affectionately as Licorice, she performed percussion, sang harmonies, and contributed original compositions. The band achieved international recognition and famously appeared at the Woodstock Festival in 1969. Friends described McKechnie as artistic, spiritual, and unconventional, someone drawn to alternative lifestyles and personal freedom. After leaving the band in 1972, following the end of a relationship with bandmate Robin Williamson, she continued performing with various musical projects in the United Kingdom and later in the United States. She eventually moved to California, married musician Brian Lambert, and remained loosely connected to music communities throughout the 1970s. Over time, however, her lifestyle became increasingly transient. McKechnie maintained intermittent contact with family into the mid-1980s. She visited Edinburgh in 1986, marking one of the last confirmed occasions relatives saw her in person. Accounts of her final movements vary slightly, but share common elements. Family members later reported she had been in Sacramento, California, recovering from surgery sometime in the late 1980s. Around this same period, acquaintances recalled her traveling frequently and living a nomadic lifestyle. Music journalist Mark Ellen later wrote that she was reportedly last seen hitchhiking across the Arizona desert sometime around 1987. After that point, communication stopped entirely. No confirmed phone calls, letters, financial activity, or verified sightings followed. Unlike many missing persons cases, there was no single day authorities identified as the moment she disappeared, only a gradual realization that contact had ceased. McKechnie was never officially the subject of a large-scale missing persons investigation during the years immediately following her disappearance. Because she lived independently and often traveled, her absence was not immediately treated as suspicious. Former husband Brian Lambert later stated that McKechnie struggled with mental health challenges, including schizophrenia, and had at times chosen to live without permanent housing. According to him, she occasionally worked temporary jobs, but preferred a wandering lifestyle. Some believe she intentionally chose to start a new life away from public identity. Others suspect she may have encountered danger while hitchhiking or living transiently. Former bandmate Rose Simpson publicly acknowledged the possibility that McKechnie may have died without her identity being known. No physical evidence confirming any scenario has ever surfaced. McKechnie's disappearance never generated sustained headlines because it unfolded gradually rather than suddenly. There was no crime scene, no confirmed date of disappearance, and no immediate police investigation. Additionally, her nomadic lifestyle led many to assume she had simply moved on. Without clear evidence of foul play or active searches, media attention remained minimal and quickly faded. For McKechnie's family and former collaborators, the uncertainty has endured quietly. Over the years, musicians and journalists occasionally revisited her story, often expressing concern rather than certainty. Unlike cases driven by large public campaigns, remembrance has largely come through music history discussions and retrospectives of the incredible string band. Each renewed mention serves as a reminder that a once visible artist gradually disappeared without closure. Her story remains suspended between absence and possibility, neither officially solved nor definitively explained. What if her disappearance had been recognized as urgent before years passed without contact? And how many people vanish quietly simply because their absence looks like a personal choice? Story 4. On the morning of March 10, 1981, traffic moved steadily through the New Orleans suburbs as workers headed toward offices, hospitals, and government buildings. In nearby Metairie, Louisiana, 20-year-old Regina Marie Rowell left home expecting to begin another ordinary day. She never arrived at work, and within days, only her abandoned car remained to mark where her story seemed to stop. Regina Marie Rowell was born on December 23, 1960. At the time of her disappearance, she was 20 years old and living in Metairie, part of Jefferson Parish, just outside New Orleans. She worked at the Veterans Administration Medical Center, a steady job that reflected a routine, structured lifestyle. Family members described Regina as responsible and dependable. She maintained close relationships with her siblings and relatives, and there were no known indications she planned to leave home or disappear voluntarily. Those closest to her remembered ordinary details: what she wore when she left and the expectation that she would return later that day. Physically, Regina stood about 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed approximately 120 pounds. She had strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes, pierced ears, and a noticeable scar on her calf from a removed birthmark. Her life appeared stable, grounded in work and family routines common for a young woman beginning adulthood. Nothing about her circumstances suggested that March 10th would become the last confirmed day anyone saw her. On the morning of March 10th, 1981, Regina left home early, reportedly heading to her job at the VA Medical Center in New Orleans. She never arrived. When she failed to return home or contact family, concern quickly grew. Days passed without answers. 6 days later, on March 16th, Regina's car was discovered abandoned near the Huey P. Long Bridge in Jefferson Parish. Inside the vehicle were her purse, wallet, and identification, items investigators often consider essential to daily life and unlikely to be intentionally left behind. Early assumptions suggested she may have jumped from the bridge, a theory shaped largely by the location of the vehicle rather than confirmed evidence. However, no witnesses came forward, no physical evidence supported the conclusion, and no trace of Regina was ever recovered. Her disappearance effectively ended at the discovery of the car. The investigation into Regina's disappearance was limited from the beginning. Records later indicated that documentation surrounding her case was incomplete or missing, creating long-term obstacles for investigators and her family. Search efforts produced no confirmed sightings or physical evidence explaining what happened after she left home that morning. Over time, several possibilities were considered regarding Regina Rowell's disappearance. Investigators confirmed that she never arrived at work on the morning she vanished, and 6 days later, her car was discovered near a major bridge with her personal belongings still inside, while no confirmed sightings occurred after she left home. Because of the vehicle's location, one early theory suggested she may have died by suicide near the bridge. However, others considered the possibility that she encountered foul play before reaching work or was intercepted or redirected somewhere along her usual route. In 2012, an anonymous tip to Crime Stoppers suggested Regina may have been the victim of a crime. However, authorities reportedly struggled to pursue the lead due to missing or incomplete original police records tied to her disappearance. The nature of the tip was never publicly disclosed to her family. DNA samples were eventually collected from relatives and entered into national databases, but no matches have been announced. Regina's disappearance faded largely because early assumptions replaced sustained investigation. With little evidence, limited documentation, and no body recovered, media attention gradually disappeared. Without new developments or official updates, coverage slowed, and the case quietly slipped from public awareness despite remaining unresolved. Regina's family never accepted simple explanations for her disappearance. They struggled with the absence of clear investigative answers and the frustration of learning that parts of her case history could not be located years later. In 1987, Regina was legally declared deceased, a legal step that offered closure on paper, but not in reality. Her siblings have continued sharing her story through advocacy and online awareness efforts, hoping renewed attention might generate information long overlooked. For them, Regina remains not a cold case, but a missing sister whose life paused without explanation. Decades later, uncertainty remains the heaviest burden, not knowing whether answers were missed, ignored, or simply lost to time. What if Regina's disappearance had received sustained investigation from the beginning rather than early assumptions? And could answers still exist today within details that were never fully documented? Story 5. On the morning of March 14, 2018, freelance photojournalist Vladjimir Legagneur left his home in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, carrying his camera and heading toward Grand Ravine, a neighborhood known for poverty, violence, and limited police access. He planned to document daily life inside the community. By evening, his phone fell silent, and within days, uncertainty replaced answers. Vladjimir Legagneur was 30 years old at the time of his disappearance. Born and raised in Haiti, he built his career as a freelance photojournalist, contributing to local outlets, including Le Matin and Le Haiti. Colleagues described him as passionate, determined, and deeply committed to telling stories through images. His photography often focused on ordinary Haitians and communities rarely seen in mainstream coverage. According to his wife, Florette Guerrier, photography was never simply employment for him. It was a calling. Despite the financial instability common among freelancers, he continued accepting independent assignments, believing documentation could bring attention to overlooked realities. At home, he was known as a devoted husband who maintained regular contact with his family, especially when working in unfamiliar or dangerous areas. On March 14th, Legagneur told his wife he was traveling to Grand Ravine to meet a contact for a personal reporting project, examining the aftermath of clashes between police and armed groups. Because of the risks, they agreed he would check in every 2 hours by phone. Around midday, Guerrier called him as planned. He answered briefly, reassuring her that he was busy but safe. When she called again later, the phone rang, unanswered. That would be the last confirmed contact anyone had with him. Investigators later confirmed that Legagneur stopped at a nearby police station before entering Grand Ravine, a neighborhood where outsiders were closely monitored. After that point, no verified sightings placed him leaving the area. 2 days later, after personally searching hospitals, police stations, and morgues, Guerrier filed a missing person report. Authorities ruled out kidnapping early, noting that no ransom demands were made. Police launched an operation in Grand Ravine soon afterward. During the search, officers discovered partial human remains and personal items, including a hat, near the location where Legagneur was last believed to be working. Investigators confirmed that Legagneur entered a high-risk neighborhood while working and maintained phone contact shortly after arrival before communication abruptly stopped. Human remains were later found nearby, though never officially identified. Authorities released little information about investigative progress. Several possibilities were discussed: that he may have been killed while reporting in a gang-controlled area, mistaken for an informant or outsider, or caught in violence connected to tensions between gangs and security forces. No suspects were publicly identified, and the investigation gradually stalled. Although Legagneur's disappearance prompted protests among Haitian journalists, international coverage remained limited. Political instability, scarce media resources, and the global tendency to overlook violence against journalists in smaller nations meant updates received little sustained attention. As new crises emerged, reporting faded, and the case slowly disappeared from international headlines despite remaining unresolved. His wife and fellow journalists continued organizing marches in Port-au-Prince, holding photographs and asking a simple question: where is Vladjimir? Press freedom organizations called for transparency, but official updates remained scarce. Years later, Legagneur's disappearance stands as a reminder of the risks faced by independent journalists working without protection or visibility. While public attention moved on, those closest to him continue waiting for certainty. Not headlines, but answers. What if the story Vladjimir set out to document became the story that was never fully investigated? And how many disappearances fade simply because the world stops looking too soon? 5 people vanished under different circumstances, in different countries, different decades, and different lives. But each case shares the same ending. The attention faded before the answers came. Headlines moved on, investigations slowed, public memory grew quiet. Yet for the families left behind, nothing ever truly ended. Because a disappearance doesn't fade when the news stops reporting it, only when the truth is finally known. This is Vanished Stories, where the missing are never forgotten,